hold on a second. If you're over 65 and own your home, you need to stop what you're doing right now and listen to this. Because what just happened on October 22nd with the DWP could change everything for you. I'm not trying to scare you, but I am trying to wake you up. There's a new rule change that's already affecting thousands of seniors across the UK, and honestly, most people have no idea this is even happening. Here's what's going on. The DWP just confirmed something that could impact your home ownership in ways you never expected. And I know what you're thinking, but I've paid off my mortgage. Or, I've owned my home for decades. Trust me, I thought the same thing. But this? This is different. Now, I've spent the last 48 hours digging through the official documents, talking to experts, and breaking down exactly what this means for YOU. And what I found? It's both shocking and something every senior needs to understand immediately. Before we dive into the details, and believe me, you're going to want to hear every single word of this, do me a huge favor. If this information helps you today, smash that like button right now. It helps me reach more seniors who desperately need to see this. All right, let's get into what's really happening. So here's where things get really interesting and honestly, a little bit concerning. On October 22nd, the Department for Work and Pensions made an announcement that flew under the radar for most people. You probably didn't see it on the evening news. It probably didn't pop up on your Facebook feed. But make no mistake, this is one of those quiet changes that's going to have a massive impact on seniors who own their homes. Now, before I go any further, I want you to understand something really important. This isn't about scaring you. This is about making sure you're informed, because knowledge is power, especially when it comes to protecting what you've worked your entire life to build. Your home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's your security. It's where you've raised your family. It's where you've created memories. And for many of you watching this right now, it represents the single largest asset you own. So what exactly did the DWP announce on October 22nd? Well, they've introduced new rules around how home ownership is assessed when it comes to certain benefits and support systems. And this is where things get complicated, because it's not just about one benefit or one program. This change ripples across multiple areas that affect seniors in really significant ways. Let me break this down in a way that actually makes sense, because the official documentation, it's written in that typical government language that seems designed to confuse people rather than help them understand what's actually happening. The new rules fundamentally change how the value of your home is considered when you're applying for or receiving certain types of financial support. Now, you might be thinking, well, I'm not on benefits, so this doesn't affect me. But hold on, because this goes way beyond what most people traditionally think of as benefits. Here's what's really going on. The DWP has lowered the threshold for what they consider significant property wealth. What does that mean in plain English? It means that if your home has increased in value over the years, which let's face it, most homes have, you might suddenly find yourself in a position where you're considered to have too much wealth to qualify for support that you previously would have been entitled to. And we're not just talking about means-tested benefits here. We're talking about things like help with care costs, support for home modifications if you develop mobility issues, assistance with heating costs, and even some aspects of pension credit. The really tricky part is that this isn't about how much money you actually have in your bank account. This is about the theoretical value locked up in your property. You could be living on a modest pension, struggling to pay your bills, watching every penny you spend at the supermarket. But because your home has gone up in value over the past 20 or 30 years, suddenly the system views you as wealthy. Can you see the problem here? You can't eat bricks and mortar. You can't pay your electricity bill with your home's equity unless you're willing to sell or take out an equity release scheme, which comes with its own massive set of complications and risks. Let me give you a real-world example that really drives this home. Imagine you're a 72-year-old widow. You and your late husband bought your home back in 1985 for maybe £40,000. You worked hard, you paid off that mortgage, and now you own it outright. That home is now worth £350,000 because property prices have gone through the roof in your area. You're living on the state pension plus a small private pension that gives you maybe £15,000 a year total. You're not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. But under these new rules, when you apply for help with care costs, because you're developing arthritis and need assistance with daily tasks. The system looks at that £350,000 property value and says, sorry, you've got too much wealth. You need to fund your own care. Now, the previous rules had protections in place for exactly this kind of situation. There were higher thresholds. There was more flexibility in how property wealth was assessed, especially if you were still living in that property. But these new October 22nd rules have tightened everything up considerably. The government's argument is that they need to make sure support goes to those who really need it, and that people with significant assets should use those assets before claiming state support. On paper, that might sound reasonable. But in practice, it creates enormous problems for ordinary seniors who simply had the good fortune, or maybe just the timing, to buy property when it was affordable. Here's another angle that's really worrying people, and rightfully so. The new rules also affect how quickly you might be forced to consider selling your home or releasing equity if you do need care. Under the old system, there were safeguards that gave you time, that allowed you to explore options, that protected your right to stay in your home for as long as possible. The new rules have shortened those time frames significantly. What this means in practice is that if you need residential care, or even significant home care, you might be faced with much faster pressure to make decisions about your property. Decisions that should take months of careful consideration and family discussion might now need to be made in weeks. And let's talk about the equity release issue for a moment, because this is something that really concerns me. As these new rules push more seniors into a position where they're told they need to use their property wealth to fund their care or support, there's going to be massive pressure to take out equity release schemes. Now, I'm not saying equity release is always bad. For some people, in some situations, it can be a useful tool, but it's expensive. The interest rates are typically much higher than regular mortgages. The amount you owe can grow dramatically over time. And most importantly, it eats into the inheritance you might have been hoping to leave to your children or grandchildren. It also reduces your options later in life. Once you've released equity, you've got less financial flexibility, not more. What really frustrates me about these rule changes is that they don't seem to account for regional differences in property values. Someone living in a modest 3-bedroom semi in parts of London or the southeast could easily have a property worth £500,000 or more, not because they're wealthy, but simply because of where they happen to live. Meanwhile, someone in another part of the country might have a much larger, nicer home worth £200,000. Under these new rules, the person in the southeast gets penalized simply because of geography. They haven't made different life choices. They haven't been more extravagant. They just happen to live in an area where property prices have exploded. There's also a really important point here about people who bought their council homes under right to buy schemes back in the 1980s and 90s. These were often people on modest incomes who saw an opportunity to own their own home, encouraged by government policy at the time. They scraped together deposits, they took on mortgages they could barely afford, and they worked hard to pay them off. Now, decades later, those homes have increased in value significantly, and these new DWP rules potentially penalize them for making what was considered a positive, responsible choice at the time. It feels like moving the goalposts after the game has been played. Let me address something else that's really important here. Some people watching this might be thinking, well, this only affects people who need care or claim certain benefits, so maybe it's not relevant to me right now. But here's the thing. None of us know what the future holds. You might be fit and healthy today, managing perfectly well on your pension, not needing any additional support. But what about in 5 years? What about in 10 years? The reality is that as we age, most of us will eventually need some form of additional support, whether that's help with daily tasks, modifications to our homes, or residential care. These rule changes affect the safety net that's supposed to be there when you need it. There's also a broader principle at stake here that I think we need to talk about. Many of the people affected by these changes paid national insurance contributions their entire working lives, with the understanding that there would be a social safety net when they needed it. They did everything right. They worked hard. They saved where they could. They bought homes and paid off mortgages. They contributed to society. And now, in their later years, when they might need support, they're being told that because they were responsible enough to own a home, they're on their own. That feels like a broken promise to a lot of people, and I understand why. Now, I want to be really clear about something. I'm not saying that people with significant wealth should be able to claim the same support as people with nothing. That wouldn't be fair either. But there's a huge difference between someone with multiple properties, significant savings, and various investments, and someone whose only asset is the home they live in and have lived in for decades. The system needs to recognize the difference much more clearly than these new rules seem to. So what can you actually do about this? What are your options if you're over 65, you own your home, and you're worried about how these changes might affect you? Well, first and foremost, information is your best weapon here. You need to understand exactly how these rules apply to your specific situation. The impact varies depending on your circumstances, the value of your property, what other assets and income you have, and what kind of support you might need now or in the future. I strongly recommend that you get proper advice. And I don't just mean chatting with friends or family, although their support is valuable. I mean professional advice from people who understand the benefit system, property wealth, and how these new rules work in practice. Citizens' advice can be a good starting point, and they offer free, impartial advice. There are also specialist advisors who focus on issues affecting older people. Age UK has advisors who understand these complex situations. Independent financial advisors, who specialize in retirement planning, can also help you understand your options, although make sure you use someone who's properly regulated and doesn't have a vested interest in selling you products. You should also make sure you're claiming everything you're entitled to under the current rules. Many seniors don't claim benefits they have a right to because they don't realize they're eligible or because there's still a stigma around claiming support. But if you've paid into the system your whole life, there's absolutely no shame in claiming what you're entitled to. Pension credit, attendance allowance, housing benefit in some cases, help with council tax, these are all things that might be available to you depending on your circumstances. Getting advice will help you understand what you can claim now, before these rule changes potentially affect your eligibility. Another really important step is to have honest conversations with your family about your situation and your wishes. I know these conversations can be difficult. Nobody wants to talk about getting older, needing care, or what happens to the family home. But having these discussions now, while you're able to think clearly and make plans, is so much better than having them in a crisis when decisions need to be made urgently. Talk to your children or other family members about your financial situation, about your home, about what you want for your future. Make sure they understand these new rules and how they might affect you. Work together to develop a plan. You might also want to think about getting your financial and legal affairs in order if you haven't already. That means making sure you have a will that reflects your current wishes. It means considering a lasting power of attorney so that someone you trust can make decisions on your behalf if you become unable to do so. It means understanding what assets you have, where everything is, and making sure your family knows how to access important information if needed. This isn't about being morbid or pessimistic. It's about being practical and protecting yourself and your family. Some people in this situation are also looking at options like downsizing. If you're living in a larger home that's now worth a significant amount, moving to a smaller, less expensive property might give you some cash to live on, while also reducing your property wealth to a level that doesn't trigger these new rules. But this is a huge decision that shouldn't be rushed. Your home is more than just its financial value. It's your community, your neighbors, your familiar surroundings, your memories. The financial calculation needs to be balanced against the emotional and practical realities of moving, especially later in life. What I really want you to understand is that you're not powerless here. Yes, these rule changes are concerning. Yes, they create new challenges for seniors who own their homes. But understanding what you're dealing with is the first step to protecting yourself and making informed decisions. Don't bury your head in the sand and hope it won't affect you. Don't panic and make hasty decisions without proper advice. Take a breath, get informed, seek professional guidance, and make thoughtful plans based on your specific situation. I also think it's worth saying that if you feel strongly about these changes, make your voice heard. Write to your MP. Contact organizations that advocate for seniors. Join community groups that are raising awareness about these issues. Policy doesn't change unless people speak up, and seniors are a significant and important part of our society. Your concerns deserve to be heard and taken seriously by policymakers. Look, I know this has been a lot of information to take in. These are complex issues without simple answers. But my goal here today wasn't to give you all the answers. It was to make sure you're aware of what's happening, to help you understand how it might affect you, and to encourage you to take action to protect yourself and your family. Knowledge really is power, especially when it comes to navigating complicated government rules and regulations that can have such a significant impact on your life and financial security. Don't let these changes catch you by surprise. Be proactive. Get informed. Seek advice. Talk to your family. And most importantly, know that you have rights and options, even when the system seems stacked against you.